Hey, how you doing, Econ students? This is Isaac Nocon. Welcome back to ABCD Econ. Right now, we're going to be talking about the father of communism, Karl Marx. Born on May 5th, 1818, in Trier, Prussia, or modern-day Germany, Karl Marx is known as the biggest advocate of communism and the main antagonist of capitalism. Karl Marx was close with his father, Heinrich, and a nobleman named Ludwig von Westphalen, who was Marx's neighbor. Marx's atheistic and socialistic views originally derived from his father and Ludwig. Communism and socialism mainly have the same ideals, but socialism has more of a democratic government, whereas communism has more of an authoritarian government. His father, who was a lawyer and a vineyard owner, taught Marx to follow the scientific teachings of Isaac Newton, John Locke, and Gottfried Leibniz, instead of religious beliefs. Ludwig taught Marx the idealist views of a utopia in which society is perfect and there is no economic inequality. Karl Marx attended three universities: the University of Bonn, the Humboldt University of Berlin, and the University of Jena. In 1835, Karl Marx was at the University of Bonn, where he partied a lot, got drunk often, and spent large amounts of his father's money on unnecessary luxuries. Most of the time, he was drunk and drowning in debt. His father was disappointed in his son's actions and called him a lazy and messy college student. So, as a result, Heinrich, his father, decided to transfer Marx to the Humboldt University of Berlin in October 1836, which was a more prestigious and disciplined school. So, in Berlin, he affiliated with a group of young adults called the Young Hegelians, who were students and supporters of a German philosopher named George Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel, or GWF Hegel. This Hegelian organization, along with other German philosophers named Bruno Bauer and Ludwig Feuerbach, solidified Marx's atheistic ideals and political enthusiasm. After his father died in 1838, Marx was inclined to complete his education from law school for his father, so he earned a doctorate degree at the University of Jena. In 1842, Karl Marx wrote for a German liberal newspaper called Rheinische Zeitung, in which he wrote about societal dilemmas, economic problems, and the criticism of censorship. Marx even implemented some of his communist political principles in this newspaper. The Prussian government decided to censor this newspaper because their articles about censorship and communism were too controversial. Therefore, he moved to Paris, France in 1843, where communism was somewhat more accepted. He moved with his new wife, Jenny von Westphalen, who was actually the daughter of Ludwig von Westphalen, the neighbor that Marx was close with. In France, he wrote more controversial newspaper articles, and he met another Prussian, or German, named Friedrich Engels, whom Marx would write the world-renowned Communist Manifesto with. It was originally called the Manifesto of the Communist Party, or Manifest der Kommunistischen Partei in German. In 1845, the Prussian government even caused Marx to get banished from France because of his controversial articles about communism. Engels moved with Marx to Brussels in Belgium, and they spent 2 years composing their communist principles for the Communist Manifesto that they would publish on February 21st, 1848. In the Communist Manifesto, Marx and Engels wrote about the inevitability of communism and 10 things that a communist society would consist of. They wrote that feudalism would then lead to capitalism, which would then lead to communism. Marx considered the property and business owners who were the leaders of production of goods and services the bourgeoisie, who were mostly rich. He considered the working class the employees who worked for the business owners the proletariat. In Chapter 4 of the Communist Manifesto, Marx says, "The communists disdain to conceal their views and aims. They openly declare that their ends can be attained only by the forcible overthrow of all existing social conditions. Let the ruling classes tremble at a communist revolution. The proletarians have nothing to lose but their chains. They have a world to win. Working men of all countries, unite!" He's basically saying that the working class, or the communists, will revolt against their bosses, or the capitalists. Then they wrote of the 10 components of the communist society that would arise from the revolution. You can pause the video to get a thorough view of the 10 components, but to sum it all up, these goals basically strive to abolish private property, impose a substantial tax that gradually increases with income, apply more government regulation in the production of industrial and agricultural products, have nationalized public transportation, and provide free public school education for the youth. Instead of having competition as in a free market or capitalist economy, the workers in a communist society would work at their jobs to the best of their ability. Then, the production from their work would be shared equally among society. This is to prevent the entrepreneurs and business owners who are providing the jobs from getting too rich, so that there would be no economic inequality and there would be no high, middle, or low class. Now, some critics of communism say that this will not give workers an incentive to work hard and provide good quality products because everyone ends up getting the same thing. They are not rewarded with high quality products or their own surplus profit for their hard work. One economist named Adam Smith, who is renowned as the father of capitalism, says in his book, The Wealth of Nations, "It is not from the benevolence of the butcher, the brewer, or the baker that we expect our dinner, but from their regard to their own self-interest. We address ourselves not to their humanity, but to their self-love, and never talk to them of our own necessities, but of their advantages." This means that when business owners pursue their self-interest of making money, the overall quality of goods will be increasingly better because they need to sell high-quality products and services in order to compete with other businesses. In Das Kapital, another book published by Karl Marx on September 14, 1867, he goes over the disadvantages of capitalism. 1. Falling profit rates and accumulation of capital. 2. Increasing concentration of economic power. 3. Deepening crises and depression. 4. The Industrial Reserve Army. And 5. The increasing misery of the proletariat. The first problem of capitalism that Karl Marx talks about is the falling profit rates and accumulation of capital. So basically, Marx is saying that as a company adds more constant capital to their companies, such as machines, their profit or surplus falls in the long run. For example, one company makes a product that many people buy. They now have enough profit to add more machines instead of human workers, who are considered variable capital, to manufacture more of their product more efficiently with the machines. Other firms make similar products, so the original company has to add new and improved machines to make the product at a cheaper price to compete with the other firms. Buying more machines with their capital causes profit rates to fall because there will be a large supply of the product at a very cheap price. The second problem of capitalism is increasing concentration of economic power. So Marx is saying that the leading company in an industry will make other small companies go out of business or merge, and the leading company will continually gain more power. For example, Amazon with CEO Jeff Bezos is making many businesses go out of business due to their highly successful and easy to use electronic commerce platform. their competition decreases and they become increasingly powerful in their industry. The third problem of capitalism is deepening crises and depressions. Marx teaches that capitalism is bound to have an economic depression, such as the Great Depression. However, each economic depression will get deeper and worse every single time it occurs, according to Marx. The fourth problem is the Industrial Reserve Army. This term refers to the unemployed group of people who lost their jobs because their jobs became obsolete from machines. In other words, these are the people that were replaced by the machines in factories. An example of a job that has gone obsolete is a switchboard operator, in which one connects phone calls by plugging in phone cords into outlets on a switchboard. We now can directly call people easily with just a tap on the phone. The fifth problem of capitalism is increasing misery of the proletariat. Karl Marx said that instead of adding more machines, capitalists can make the workers work longer days and hours for the same wage so that the capitalists can get more profit. This was called exploitation by Karl Marx. This also relates to the labor theory of value in Das Kapital, which is the theory that the value of a product is based on how much work was spent by a human to produce it. For example, this labor note shows that 3 hours of labor in carpenter's work is equal to 12 pounds of corn. At the end of chapter 6 of the book New Ideas from Dead Economists, the author Todd G. Bushels criticizes Karl Marx and explains the impacts of communism on modern-day countries. He elaborates on how Marx's predictions on the unhappiness of workers, unemployment, and failure of capitalism are false. Bushel stated that Marx believed that the working class would get poorer as the economy grew and technological innovations occurred in capitalism. However, Marx later realized that this claim was false about a decade after he published the Communist Manifesto. For example, the hard-working farm workers gained almost a 50% increase in profit from harvesting crops in the 1960s. Therefore, he switched his beliefs and claimed that the working class and business owners would both get richer, but the business owners would just get rich faster. The author also stated that capitalism is still thriving today and that it is not failing. The author, Bushels, stated that the overall employment is increased, not only with men, but also with the employment of women. Then, the author scrutinizes Karl Marx on his communist principles. He explains how Karl Marx focuses so much on the land, labor, and capital components of the factors of production that he does not consider the entrepreneurship portion of capitalism that stimulates motivation to create better high-quality products. He forgets that creativity and entrepreneurship is what creates wealth and innovation in economies. In New Ideas from Dead Economists, the author claims, why did Russians living under communism beg for American-made denim jeans? Not because the Soviet Union lacked the cotton or the workers to produce high-quality clothing, but because they lacked the imagination, motivation, and discipline. So this refers back to what Adam Smith said in The Wealth of Nations about capitalism and its increasingly improving products due to entrepreneurs pursuing their self-interest of making money by competing with others. Speaking of Russia, the author also discusses how Russia and China have followed communist principles in recent years. He said that Vladimir Lenin and his army called the Red Guards had succeeded in leading the working class to overthrow the ruling class of Russia on November 7th and 8th, 1917. He had created a communist dictatorship of the proletariat, which made Lenin the leader of the first communist state of the world. So Vladimir Lenin was Marx's biggest supporter. So under his rule, he implemented one of the communist goals of abolishing private ownership of agriculture and manufacturing products. He forced the hard-working farmers to feed Lenin's army the surpluses of grain because agriculture was government owned. When capitalism was removed by adding more government regulation, industrial and agricultural production dropped so low that about 5 million Russians starved to death in 1921. The rest of the living Russians lived in poverty and poor conditions due to Lenin's implementation of communism. As a result, he had to carry out the new economic policy, which consisted of a free market, private ownership of businesses, and other policies of capitalism to save the Russian economy in 1922. Later that year, on December 30th, 1922, Vladimir Lenin founded the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, or the USSR, or the Soviet Union, which would ultimately fall in 1991 due to the extreme wealth of the socialist leaders and the extreme poverty of the rest of Russia's citizens who had to deal with shortages of food, shortages of products, and an overall poor standard of living. The communist flag contains a hammer and a sickle, which basically represents the working class. Then he said how China had also followed Marxist teachings of communism in 1949, but slowly shifted towards capitalism over the years. Inspired by the leftist and communist overthrow of the ruling class of the Russian bourgeoisie by Vladimir Lenin, the Chinese Communist Party was founded by Li Daozhao and Chen Duxiu in 1921. In 1958, one of the leaders of the Chinese Communist Party, named Mao Zedong, who was a Marxist, initiated the Great Leap Forward, which was a plan to bring about one of the goals of communism: to abolish private businesses of farming and industrialization of steel. Agricultural production, the distribution of meals, and allocation of resources were regulated and owned by the government, in contrast to capitalist economies. Mao Zedong forced the farmers to use new farming techniques that were not proven to actually work in order to increase productivity, because none of the workers had an incentive to work, as they could not keep their profits. They could not keep their profits because they did not want the government did not want one farmer to become more rich than the others, resulting in an economic inequality. Zedong's new techniques failed and agricultural production extremely decreased even more, so there was a shortage of food. When farmers failed to grow crops and requested the government for more food, the farmers were tortured and some were killed. Famine, torture, forced work, and the failure of a communist economy caused more than 30 million people to die in China from 1958 to 1968, with the Great Leap Forward plan by Mao Zedong. After Mao Zedong's death, China started to slowly move towards capitalism from 1978 to 1989 under the rule of Deng Xiaoping, who believed that farmers should sell their own surplus from their harvest and not have the government regulate them. Although China is still mainly ruled by the Chinese Communist Party, it still consists of some capitalist and socialist policies, making them have one of the best economies in the world. So, here is a quick recap of what we went over. The bourgeoisie are property and business owners or leaders of the production of goods and services, and they own most of society's wealth and they're mostly rich. The proletariat are employees who work for the business owners, and they're workers and of the low class. Exploitation is when capitalists make the workers work longer days and hours for the same wage so that the capitalists can get more profit. The labor theory of value is a theory that the value of a product is based on how much work was spent by a human to produce it. The Communist Manifesto was Karl Marx's book with the 10 components of communism. Das Kapital is Karl Marx's book with the 5 problems of capitalism. Some of the goals of communism stated in the Communist Manifesto include the abolition of private property, a heavy progressive or graduated income tax, and free education for children. Some of the problems of capitalism, according to Des Capital, include falling profit rates and accumulation of capital, increasing concentration of economic power, and deepening crises and depression. And also, the two wide known countries that were once influenced by Marxist communist ideals are Russia and China. And the reason for the failure of Lenin's and De Zong's communist economies is again implementing the communist goals of abolishing private ownership of agriculture and manufacturing products. Alright, so for the assessment, the link is in the description below. And so, just try your best, okay? Because your best is enough, okay? I believe in you. You can do this. Alright, so during Marx's time, he was not the world-renowned economist as he is today. Most people during that time would have looked down upon his ideas of a communist society, and they would not think he would make an impact. However, he stayed strong with his beliefs and ended up influencing some of the biggest countries in the world, Russia and China. During his time, he was a normal person, just like the rest of us, yet he still managed to change the world. In one of his books, Karl Marx inspirationally says, "The philosophers have only interpreted the world in various ways. The point is to change it." Thank you.